An absolute disgrace. That's what one fan is calling the decision from referees during this moment at a WNBA game on Saturday.
One brutal hit changed everything. A flagrant 2, an instant ejection, and then 2 words posted online that turned a basketball foul into a national conversation about race, intent, and accountability. What happened next wasn't a swift league response or a clear standard being enforced. Instead, the WNBA offered a $1,000 fine and almost complete silence while commentators started asking the question nobody expected to hear. Does Adam Silver need to step in? The league that's been riding unprecedented growth, record viewership, and a new generation of fans tuning in specifically for moments like this one suddenly looked unprepared to handle the very spotlight it's been chasing. A foul got reviewed and upgraded on its merits. A post got interpreted 1,000 different ways. And a league that moved fast enough to suspend an owner weeks earlier couldn't seem to move at all when one of its own players was at the center of the storm. Here's how one play on a nationally televised game spiraled into questions about whether the WNBA itself knows how to manage its own moment, and why the silence from the top might have made everything worse. August 8, 2024. The Indiana Fever are on the road at the United Center in Chicago, taking on the Sky in exactly the kind of game that's defined the entire WNBA season. This isn't some midweek matchup nobody's paying attention to. The arena is packed, the cameras are rolling, and every possession is going to get replayed, analyzed, and dissected across social media the moment it happens. These are the moments that built the league's new momentum. Caitlin Clark games, high-stakes matchups, the kind of nationally televised basketball that used to feel impossible to get casual fans interested in, and this particular game is already living up to the hype. The pace is frantic, the physicality is intense. Both teams are playing the kind of basketball that makes you understand why this league suddenly has people's attention. Sophie Cunningham pushes the ball in transition, gets a step on the defense, and rises for what should have been a routine fast break layup. Nothing out of the ordinary. The kind of play that happens a dozen times a night in any basketball game at any level. Except DiJonai Carrington comes from behind and catches Cunningham across the head and neck with a hit hard enough to knock her sideways in midair. The sound carries through the arena. The impact is visible even if you're sitting in the nosebleed seats. Cunningham's shot somehow still drops through the net because muscle memory and coordination don't just shut off when your body gets hit, but her landing is anything but clean. She comes down hard, and for a moment the entire arena just goes quiet. That split second where a crowd doesn't know whether to cheer or react with concern, because they're not sure yet whether what they just saw was basketball or something that crossed a line. The officials don't wait around wondering. They stop play immediately and head to the monitor. This isn't a let-it-go situation. This is a full review from every angle, frame by frame, camera pulling back and pushing in to understand exactly what happened in those milliseconds of contact. And when they come back from that review, the call is upgraded. Flagrant foul penalty 2. The explanation is straightforward: wind-up, impact, and follow-through high across the neck. A combination that signals excessive and unnecessary contact. That combination, the officials decided without much apparent debate, existed in that play. Penalty 2 means only one thing. Carrington is done for the night, automatic ejection. The crowd reacts. Carrington leaves the court. But here's the part that matters for what comes next. Cunningham doesn't stay down. She pops up almost instantly, and the fury on her face is visible even from the broadcast cameras. She gets in Carrington's space, there's a shove, and it takes both benches and the entire officiating crew to keep the situation from boiling over into something much bigger than a flagrant foul. The moment gets tense. The moment gets physical. The moment gets personal in a way that goes beyond just basketball players being frustrated about a call. What's also worth noting here is context that most people didn't know about going into this game. This wasn't Carrington's first time in flagrant territory this season, not even close. Earlier in the year, she was assessed a flagrant foul in the season opener for a hit to the head of Minnesota's Jessica Shepard. Then another flagrant came later against Seattle after contact with Skylar Diggins' head. 2 flagrants already on her record before this incident ever happened. 2 different opponents, 2 different games, same kind of high contact, high risk hit, and fans and analysts had already started talking about the pattern. That context is everything for understanding why the refs didn't treat this like an isolated incident. They weren't just grading one play in a vacuum, looking at it like it could have gone either way depending on the angle or the mood of the officiating crew that night. They were looking at a player who'd already been flagged twice for the exact same type of contact. A third flagrant on a nationally televised game against a player already known league-wide as someone who refuses to let a hard foul slide. That's not a judgment call, that's not a coin flip, that's about as close to an obvious call as this league gets. The refs saw a pattern and they called it the way the rulebook says they should when they see that pattern repeat itself. Indiana holds on to win 90-86. In any other week, that's the headline, that's what everyone talks about. A road win in a hostile building. Another win for a Fever team that's been drawing record attention all season. Except nobody's talking about the final score anymore by the time that buzzer sounds. The moment Carrington's flagrant 2 was called, something shifted in how people understood what had actually happened on the court. This wasn't just about one play anymore. It was about a season-long pattern that had been building in the background, the kind of thing that analysts and fans were already whispering about before this nationally televised incident ever went down. Understanding that pattern is crucial because it explains why the officiating crew made the call they did, and it explains why that call landed so differently than a one-off flagrant would have. Go back to the beginning of the season. Carrington comes out of the gates and gets hit with a flagrant foul in the opening game against Minnesota. Jessica Shepard takes a hard hit to the head. The refs review it, upgrade it, and Carrington's out. It's a statement moment early in the season, a reminder about what the league considers excessive contact, but it's also the kind of thing that gets filed away. One player, one mistake early in the year, everybody moves on, except they didn't have to move on because it happened again. Later in that same season against Seattle, Carrington's in flagrant territory once more. This time it's Skylar Diggins on the receiving end of contact to the head. 2 flagrants now, 2 different opponents, 2 games separated by enough time that it starts looking less like coincidence and more like pattern. The basketball community starts paying attention in a different way. Analysts begin bringing it up. Fan accounts start compiling clips. Nobody's saying Carrington is trying to hurt people intentionally, but they are saying something is off about her judgment, her recklessness, or both when it comes to understanding where the line is between hard defense and excessive contact. By the time the Chicago game rolls around, that pattern has become the subtext of everything Carrington does on the court. Other players know about it, coaches know about it, the officiating crews know about it, and more importantly, the fans who watch these games know about it. It's not invisible. It's not a secret buried in some league database that only the front office understands. It's common knowledge among anyone paying real attention to the WNBA this season. So when Carrington goes for a third flagrant on a third opponent, she's not operating in a vacuum. The refs aren't looking at just that one play in isolation and debating whether it reaches the threshold. They're looking at a player who's already been flagged twice for the same exact type of contact, and now it's happened again. That context changes everything about how you evaluate the call. It stops being a borderline judgment and becomes something much clearer. The rulebook gives officials the ability to consider a player's history when making decisions about flagrant fouls. It doesn't require them to ignore patterns. It actually encourages them to take patterns seriously. Think about the position the officiating crew was actually in during that review. They could see the wind-up, impact, and follow-through high across Cunningham's neck. They could see contact that met the technical definition of excessive, but they were also aware that this was the third time in one season that this exact player had been flagged for the exact same thing. Third time, third opponent, same pattern. That's not a situation where the refs go to the monitor thinking, this could go either way. That's a situation where they go to the monitor thinking, we've already flagged this player twice for this exact thing, and here it is again. The National Basketball Association has rules about how flagrant fouls work. There's wind-up, impact, follow-through as the rubric, but there's also judgment baked into it. There's human discretion involved. And part of that discretion is supposed to account for whether a player is making a mistake or developing a habit, whether they're learning from feedback or repeating the same behavior, whether they're trying to adjust their game or whether they're on the court doing the exact same thing that got them flagged the last 2 times they played. By the time that third flagrant happens, it's not just about that one play, it's about a season-long conversation that's already happening in the background. It's about what happens when a player gets told twice you're playing too recklessly with contact to the head and then goes back out and does it again on national television. The refs made the call they had to make. They made it based on what they saw and based on what had come before. The upgraded penalty, too, wasn't controversial because the contact itself was borderline. It was inevitable because the pattern had been established. And that pattern is everything for understanding why what happened next mattered so much. If the league expected Sophie Cunningham to lose it after that foul, to rage against the machinery, to use her post-game platform to demand answers or stoke the fire that was already building in the moment when she shoved Carrington, she didn't cooperate with that expectation. She did something harder. She showed up at the microphone, got asked direct questions about whether the hit was intentional, and answered with the kind of clarity and composure that most players spend their entire careers trying to develop and never quite pull off in real time. When reporters asked whether she thought the foul was intentional, Cunningham didn't dodge, she didn't perform injured, she didn't deflect with team speak or call for league action, she just answered. "I think it was unnecessary," she said, and then she added context that most players wouldn't think to include in the moment. "I've never really spoken to her and have no beef with her, but I guess she has some pent-up stuff, so get your stuff off, that's fine, I can take it." That's not the response of someone looking to escalate. That's not a player using her platform to throw fuel on a fire that's already burning. That's someone who got hit, got back up, and is willing to acknowledge that maybe Carrington had reasons that existed outside of this one play. She went further when asked about her immediate reaction, the shove, the moment where both benches got involved. She explained exactly why she reacted the way she did. "I popped up, I'm not going to let anyone just do that to me. I think everyone knows that. I think that's why she did it, because she wants attention." That last line matters. It's not just a jab at Carrington, it's consistent with who Cunningham has been all season. This is a player who's built her entire reputation in Indiana around being the Fever's protector, the one who steps in when a teammate gets hit, the one who doesn't back down when it's her turn. It's the same instinct that puts her in the middle of scrums whenever things get physical around Caitlin Clark. It's earned her both technical fouls and a very loyal, very loud fan base who see her as the player in the league who refuses to let anyone get pushed around without a response. Fans who have been following the Fever all season already know that identity. They know Cunningham as someone who plays right up against the edge of the rulebook, someone physical, someone who doesn't shy away from confrontation. What they hadn't seen before was Cunningham handling a controversy this loud with this much composure in real time, standing at a podium and controlling the narrative instead of letting the narrative control her. No deflecting, no comment. No waiting for a team's statement to speak for her. She answered the basketball question, and then she answered the much harder question, the one about Carrington's post and what it meant, back to back without missing a beat. That directness is exactly why so many reporters in that room walked away saying the same thing to each other afterward. That Cunningham had basically written the calmest, most quotable response possible to a situation that could have gotten a lot messier if she'd handled it any other way. In a league where post-game availability so often turns into careful, coach non-answers, where players speak in generalities and avoid specifics, where the default move is to say as little as possible in the most diplomatic way possible, Cunningham's willingness to just say what she actually thought stood out as much as anything that happened on the court. Because within minutes of leaving the court, Carrington had posted something online that would completely change the direction of this entire story, and when reporters asked Cunningham about it directly, she didn't dodge that either. "I think the league is taking care of that," she said. "This has nothing to do with race. Last year I did the same thing and I got kicked out. And I deserved to be kicked out." That wasn't a throwaway line, that was a real receipt. Cunningham herself had been ejected for a flagrant during a physical, chaotic game back in 2025, part of the same reputation she'd built as someone who plays right up against the edge of the rulebook. By bringing that up unprompted, she wasn't just deflecting the race framing in the abstract. She was pointing at her own history and daring anyone watching to explain why the standard should be different this time around. She was saying, "I got flagged hard for playing the same way, I accepted it, I moved on." That single answer, calm, direct, and delivered without hesitation, became just as widely shared as the foul itself. Cunningham wasn't just defending her body. She was actively trying to shut down a narrative before it spiraled further. Minutes after her ejection, after the arena had settled back into game mode, after the immediate chaos of the moment had passed and everyone was supposed to just move on to the next possession, DiJonai Carrington opened threads and posted 2 words. "White privilege." She tagged the Indiana Fever directly in that post. No context, no explanation, no thread or thread-like structure to help people understand what she meant or what she was referring to. Just 2 words and a tag sent out into a sports internet that was already replaying her foul on infinite loop across every platform that exists. The reaction was immediate. It was also split almost entirely down predictable lines, the kind of lines that have been drawn and redrawn through years of these exact kinds of conversations in sports and beyond. Some people pointed to Carrington's academic background. She studied African and African American studies at Stanford. She came out of a university environment where she was exposed to frameworks for understanding systemic issues, historical patterns, and the ways that race shapes institutions and how institutions make decisions. Those people argued she was speaking to something bigger than one basketball play, a broader point about how physical fouls get judged depending on who's throwing them and who's absorbing them. A point about whether the rulebook gets applied equally or whether there are invisible thresholds that shift based on identity. Others called the post reckless. They argued that turning a clean officiating decision into a racial flashpoint minutes after hitting an opponent in the head and neck was its own kind of dangerous, especially given how much attention every Fever game already draws, especially given that the foul had already been reviewed and upgraded by officials whose job it is to make those calls, especially given that Carrington had already been ejected. The point in their reading was that you can't retroactively reframe a call as discriminatory when it was made by officials doing their job, reviewing the footage, and making a judgment that most people watching agreed with. And then the coaches weighed in and they didn't agree with each other or even fully agree with their own instincts. Fever head coach Stephanie White didn't try to inflate the moment into something it wasn't. "It was a hard foul," she said. I don't think that DiJonai intentionally came out to get her across the neck like she did, but it did happen and I thought it was the right call. That's a coach agreeing that an ejection was correct while still not believing her opponent meant to hurt her player. That's not the easiest thing to say out loud in front of a room full of reporters. It's the kind of measured answer that satisfies almost nobody looking for a villain. It doesn't give you a story where the opponent was reckless. It doesn't give you a story where the refs made a mistake. It gives you a story where someone made a hard foul. It was the right call, and nobody needs to be demonized in the process. On the other bench, Sky head coach Tyler Marsh gave a very different read in the moment. He said he hadn't seen a replay, but that live, it looked like Carrington was simply making a play on the ball, that the flagrant 2 didn't warrant the penalty. 2 days later, once the footage had been picked apart from every angle and he'd had time to actually study what happened, Marsh hadn't shifted much. He continued to defend Carrington's intent and pushed back on what he called inconsistent officiating across the league. He also acknowledged something else, though, choosing his words carefully. There's a lot of vitriol at DiJonai's expense, he said. There's a lot that she has to deal with as well. When we talk about protecting players, it should be every player. He stopped short of saying whether the post itself bothered him, calling it instead a reminder of the power of social media and how quickly narratives can take hold and spiral in directions nobody intended. 2 coaches, 2 very different readings of the exact same hit, and a 2-word post that had already moved the conversation somewhere neither of them could fully control. Away from the podiums, the online reaction split the same way. Some accounts defended Carrington's right to speak on systemic issues from her own lived experience and her academic background. Others, including prominent sports commentators, argued that whatever point she was reaching for got completely lost the moment she attached it to a foul that had already been reviewed and upgraded on its merits. Emmanuel Acho addressed the post directly. Somebody needs to share this message to DiJonai Carrington, he wrote. You can't call that foul white privilege. It's a debate that was never going to get settled in the comment section of a Threads post. It didn't get settled, it just kept climbing. By Sunday morning, the story had jumped from sports pages onto general news and opinion sections. The kind of crossover that usually only happens when a sports controversy taps into something bigger than the sport itself. And that's exactly what happened here. When a moment like this explodes across the internet, when 2 words spark a national conversation, the people with the biggest platforms and the most credibility are usually the coaches. They're the ones who can speak with authority about what actually happened on the court. They're the ones whose opinions carry weight because they've been in these situations before. They understand the rulebook. They understand intent. They understand the difference between a hard foul and a flagrant, between physicality and recklessness. But when 2 head coaches look at the exact same play and come away with completely different conclusions, that's when you know the conversation has moved beyond basketball and into something messier. Stephanie White had the harder job in some ways. She's the Fever coach defending one of her players who just got hit. She could have used the moment to rage against the officiating crew. She could have complained about inconsistency. She could have made it about how Carrington was trying to send a message or play dirty. That's what fans expected. That's what coaches often do when their players get hurt. Instead, White took the measured approach. It was a hard foul, she acknowledged. That admission alone puts her in a different category than most coaches in that position. She's not denying what happened. She's not saying the refs got it wrong. She's saying it was hard and it happened and the officials made the right call. But she also pushed back on the intent question. I don't think that DiJonai intentionally came out to get her across the neck like she did, she said. That's the key distinction. She's separating the action from the intent. She's saying the contact was excessive, yes, but the intent to injure wasn't necessarily there. It's a subtle distinction but an important one, because it means she's acknowledging the rulebook being applied correctly while also defending her opponent's character. She's not saying Carrington is dirty. She's saying Carrington made a hard play that went too far and the consequences were appropriate. That kind of nuance is rare in these moments. Most coaches would pick a lane and stay in it. Tyler Marsh, on the other hand, came out swinging in the other direction. In the moment watching it live without the benefit of replays, he thought Carrington was making a play on the ball. That's his read. That's what he's telling people. The flagrant 2, in his view, didn't fit what he was seeing. 2 days later, after the footage had been broken down frame by frame from every conceivable angle, Marsh still hasn't wavered. He's still defending Carrington's intent. He's still pushing back on the officiating. He's actually going further now, talking about inconsistency and how the league calls fouls across the board. But here's where Marsh said something that revealed the real problem nobody was comfortable addressing directly. He acknowledged the vitriol. There's a lot of vitriol at DiJonai's expense, he said. There's a lot that she has to deal with as well. That statement is important because it's one of the few moments where a coach actually addressed what was happening off the court, not just on it. Carrington wasn't just dealing with a flagrant ejection and a $1,000 fine. She was dealing with an avalanche of criticism, anger, and people questioning her character based on 2 words she posted online. Marsh called for consistency when talking about protecting players. "When we talk about protecting players, it should be every player," he said. He's making a point that both players deserve protection, both players deserve consideration, both players deserve to be treated fairly by the system that's supposed to keep everyone safe. It's a fair point. It's also a point that got drowned out by everything else happening around this story. When asked directly about the post itself, Marsh didn't condemn it outright. He didn't defend it either. He called it a reminder of the power of social media and how quickly narratives take hold. That's coach speak for "I'm not going to touch this part of the controversy," but it's also tacitly acknowledging that yes, the post happened, yes, it had consequences, and yes, those consequences are real regardless of whether he thinks the original call was right or wrong. So you've got 2 coaches looking at the same play. One says it was hard but the right call. The other says it wasn't that bad and the refs were inconsistent. Both of them are technically correct in their own way. Both of them are also constrained by their jobs, their loyalty to their players, and the pressure they're under to navigate a situation that's moved completely beyond what happens on the basketball court. That disagreement between the coaches is a mirror of the disagreement that had already split the internet, the sports media, and the national conversation. And it's a sign that there's no consensus building on any side of this story. The narrative is fracturing. The people with the most authority to shape it aren't trying to. They're staying in their lanes, defending their players, and hoping the story eventually finds a different target. If this incident had happened in a vacuum, if it was just a flagrant foul and a controversial post in an otherwise quiet season, the league might have been able to manage it. They could have issued a statement. They could have clarified their standard. They could have explained what happened and moved on. But this didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened at the exact moment when the WNBA was already navigating one of the most volatile controversies in recent league history, and that timing made everything worse. 3 weeks before the Chicago game, Sophie Cunningham made comments to ESPN about her views on transgender athletes competing in women's sports. She was direct, she was public, she was willing to stake out a position that she knew would be controversial, and it was. The backlash was immediate and intense. Boos followed her on the road, organized rallies showed up outside arenas in multiple cities, players spoke out, coaches spoke out, commentators spoke out. For 3 weeks, the Fever had been dealing with the noise around Cunningham's position while also trying to play basketball and manage a team in the middle of a season that's been drawing record attention. The league had also been dealing with it. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert sent out a memo to teams just days before the Chicago game acknowledging that discussions about transgender participation in women's sports were ongoing. The memo was an attempt to get out in front of the issue, to let teams and players know that the league was aware and engaged. It was an acknowledgement that this was a conversation happening inside the league, not just outside of it. But here's where the timing got really ugly. Just weeks before that memo, just weeks before the Chicago game, a team co-owner was suspended by the league for confronting 2 teenage fans who were holding a sign supporting Cunningham's position. The co-owner was fined. The co-owner was suspended for games. The league moved fast. The league acted decisively. The league sent a message that it could and would discipline people when they crossed a line, even when those people were owners, which is as close to untouchable as you get in any professional sports league. That was the context, that was what people remembered. The league could move when it wanted to move. The league could act when it wanted to act. The league could suspend an owner for words spoken in a parking lot to 2 teenagers. So when Carrington posted those 2 words online, when the foul got reviewed and upgraded, when the $1,000 fine got quietly announced with no accompanying statement, people remembered that the league had shown it could move fast when it wanted to. The league's silence this time landed differently because of that contrast. The league could have been loud, it could have issued a statement, it could have clarified what happened and why, it could have protected Carrington from some of the vitriol, or it could have clarified its own standards to prevent the narrative from spiraling. It did none of those things. It issued a fine and went quiet. And in doing so, it inadvertently created the impression that there was something to hide, something to manage, something the league wasn't comfortable addressing directly. By dropping a race-charged flashpoint on top of an already volatile few weeks, the situation got exponentially more complicated. The league was already trying not to get shocked by the transgender athletes' controversy. Now it was also trying to navigate a foul that had become a proxy argument for something much bigger. It added a second live wire to a league that was already trying not to get shocked by the first one. That's the part that makes the silence so noticeable. When the league wanted to act fast, finding and suspending an owner within days over comments made in a parking lot, it did. When the incident involves one of its own players, a nationally reviewed foul, and a post that's been debated by columnists on national television for 2 straight days, The same league said almost nothing beyond a fine that most people didn't even hear about until reporters went looking for it. The optics of that inconsistency are bad. The substance is worse. Because staying quiet in this moment, when the league had already demonstrated it could and would act decisively in other situations, sent a message that maybe the league didn't want to engage with this particular story. Maybe the league was uncomfortable with where the conversation was heading. Maybe the league was hoping it would blow over if they just didn't add fuel to the fire. But that's not how these stories work anymore. In an era of social media and constant coverage, silence doesn't make things go away. Silence lets the narrative get told without the institution that should be controlling it. Silence lets every theory, every criticism, every interpretation flourish unchecked. And that's exactly what happened in the days after the foul and the post. So what did the league actually do? The official answer is straightforward. Carrington was fined $1,000 in connection with the ejection and the post that followed. That part is confirmed. It's on the record. It's the one concrete action the league took in response to everything that happened. $1,000. For reference, that's a fine that most fans reading about it probably didn't even notice in the initial coverage because it got buried under the noise of everything else. It took reporters actually digging to find out that yes, a fine had been issued, yes, it was $1,000, and no, there was going to be anything else coming from the league office. What happened next, or rather what didn't happen, is where things get uncomfortable for the WNBA. As of 2 days after the incident, the league had not announced any additional discipline beyond that fine. No suspension. No further statement addressing the controversy directly, nothing beyond the quiet fine that nobody heard about. And the clearest sign of just how far that silence stretched came on Monday night when Carrington suited up and played normally against the Seattle Storm. She checked into the game with just over 5 minutes left in the first quarter as if the previous 48 hours hadn't happened at all. Ejected Saturday, fined quietly. Back on the court Monday playing a normal game like it was just another week in the season. That pattern sends its own message. The message is that from the league's perspective, this is handled. Flagrant foul on the court, automatic ejection, disciplinary fine off the court, case closed, move on. The problem is that nobody else moved on, the internet didn't move on, the commentators didn't move on, the fans didn't move on. The conversation kept going because the league never actually joined it or shaped it or guided it in any direction. The league just let it happen and hoped it would exhaust itself. Carrington herself tried to walk back part of the firestorm 2 days later, pushing back on how her post had been interpreted. "I've never once claimed that the assessment of the foul was white privilege," she wrote. That's a crucial distinction in her mind. She's saying she wasn't accusing the officials of racism. She's saying she considered herself far from ignorant or asinine when it comes to speaking on white privilege, a pointed reference to her academic background and her education. She was trying to clarify that the post was about something bigger, something more systemic, not about this specific call. Whether that clarification landed the way she intended is its own debate. But it came only after the story had already spent 2 full days dominating sports media, largely because the league itself hadn't said a word to shape the conversation one way or the other. There's a real gap between what Carrington says she meant and what most people took from 2 words with no context attached. She's arguing the criticism itself was a misreading. She's arguing that pointing out a broader concept doesn't mean she was accusing the officiating crew of racial bias in that specific call. Critics aren't buying the distinction. They're arguing that whatever nuance she intended got completely erased the moment she tagged the Indiana Fever directly in the same breath as her own ejection. In their view, you don't get to post 2 words that every reasonable person will interpret one way and then spend days arguing you meant something completely different. You own what you said. You deal with how people received it. You don't get to clarify after the fact that you meant something way more nuanced. Both things can be true at once. She could have a real academic basis for the phrase she used. The phrasing itself, stripped of any explanation, could have been always going to be read as a direct accusation by almost everyone scrolling past it. The gap between intent and reception is exactly why this story had the shelf life it did. The gap between what she meant and what people heard is why the league needed to step in and shape the conversation. Because otherwise the gap just keeps getting wider and wider as people fill it with their own interpretation. The $1,000 fine satisfied almost nobody. It was too small for people who thought Carrington crossed a line. It was confusing for people who wanted to understand whether the league thought the post was a problem or just the ejection. It was a non-answer from an institution that should have been giving answers. And because the league stayed quiet on the bigger question of what they thought about the post, about the framing, about the race question at the center of everything, the $1,000 just hung there. A fine with no context, a consequence with no explanation. A signal that the league had done something while sending no clear message about what that something was supposed to mean. With the WNBA staying quiet, the pressure didn't disappear. It just moved to people with bigger platforms and bigger microphones. Fox News columnist Joe Conca came out swinging, calling for a season-long suspension and describing the foul itself as deliberate and politically motivated. He was tying it directly to the backlash Cunningham has faced over her trans athletes' comments, suggesting the hit was retaliation for that position. It's a theory with almost no evidence supporting it, but it got said out loud on a major platform, which gave it oxygen. Analyst Aaron Torres went even further in his criticism of the league's handling of the situation, saying bluntly that it might be time for Adam Silver to consider shutting down the WNBA. That's the kind of comment that sounds extreme in the moment but actually reflects how frustrated people were getting with the league's silence. The sense that the league was failing to manage its own moment, that it was letting things spiral when it should have been getting out in front of the story. Emmanuel Acho added his voice publicly as well, criticizing Carrington's post directly and telling her that she can't call that foul white privilege. Here's what actually needs to be said clearly, though. None of that criticism means Adam Silver has done anything about this specific situation. He hasn't commented on the Cunningham-Carrington incident. He hasn't found anyone connected to it. He hasn't issued any statement tied to this controversy. His most recent public comments on the WNBA this year were about something else entirely, the league's finances, where he's previously pointed out that the NBA has historically absorbed significant annual losses to keep the WNBA running. He gave a carefully neutral answer earlier this year about whether Commissioner Kathy Engelbert will keep her job beyond this season. He said he hadn't had those discussions with Engelbert about her future, even while praising the job she's done. But that distinction matters because it explains exactly why so many people are pointing fingers upward. The NBA isn't just a distant cousin to the WNBA. It's the financial backbone. By some public estimates tied to the league's revenue structure, roughly 40% of WNBA revenue flows through the NBA. Another fifth belongs to outside investors who bought into the league through a capital raise a few years back, and what's left over is split between the teams and the players. That's the financial reality. The WNBA isn't self-sufficient yet, it relies on the NBA to exist. Silver himself has previously acknowledged that the NBA has absorbed real financial losses to keep the WNBA running year over year. That's not speculation, that's on the record. When an organization is that financially entangled with another, and a controversy this loud plays out, while the smaller league's own front office goes quiet, it's not exactly a stretch for people to start asking whether the organization with the deeper pockets and the bigger microphone should be the one to break that silence. The NBA is literally funding the league that's failing to manage this moment. And it's not just commentators asking, it's also reflected in the business reality of what's happening. The WNBA's franchise valuations have climbed, viewership numbers have climbed, social media attention has climbed sharply over the past couple of seasons. That growth cuts both ways. It means the league has more to protect than ever if this story keeps spiraling unmanaged. The more valuable the league becomes, the more expensive silence becomes as a strategy. And it means the NBA, as the financial backstop, has more riding on it too. That growth is exactly why a story like this doesn't just fade quietly the way it might have a few seasons ago. Every Fever road game right now is close to a sellout. National broadcasts are up across the board. A huge chunk of the audience tuning in is new to the sport entirely, pulled in by Clark, by Cunningham, by exactly this kind of high-stakes, high-emotion basketball. A bigger audience means a bigger spotlight on how the league handles moments like this. And right now, that spotlight is landing on a $1,000 fine and a whole lot of silence. Adam Silver hasn't stepped in, not yet. The person actually responsible for player discipline here is Kathy Engelbert, not Silver. And it's her office that's gone quiet, not his. But between a fine that satisfied almost nobody, a silence that let the story spiral in every direction at once, and commentators openly wondering out loud whether the NBA needs to get involved in how its sister league is run, the pressure on the WNBA to do more than shrug this off is only getting louder. That pressure is coming from more directions than the league can comfortably ignore for much longer. There's also a simpler read sitting underneath all the noise. Every day the league doesn't clarify its own standard for the foul, for the post, for what actually counts as handled is another day where columnists, analysts, and fans get to fill that silence with their own theory. Some of those theories are fair, some are clearly reaching, but the WNBA doesn't get to control which ones stick if it isn't willing to say anything itself. That's the real risk here more than any single fine or suspension. A league that stays quiet long enough eventually finds the story gets told without it. So there it is, a foul upgraded to a flagrant 2 in a nationally televised game, a 2-word post that split a locker room and the internet with it, a $1,000 fine followed by silence followed by a player back on the court like nothing happened. Cunningham answered every hard question herself with composure that impressed reporters who were expecting chaos. Carrington walked it back 2 days too late after the narrative had already gotten away from her. And now columnists and fans alike are asking how long before Adam Silver has to weigh in. 3 words were supposed to close this chapter: wind-up, impact, follow-through, the technical standard for what happened. Instead, they might just be the opening ones to a much bigger conversation about whether the WNBA knows how to manage its own moment when it matters most. A league that can move fast to suspend an owner moved slow to address a foul that became a national story. A league that's grown faster than anyone expected is discovering that growth brings spotlight, and spotlight demands leadership. The question isn't whether the foul was right or whether the post was fair. The question is whether the league that's been chasing mainstream attention for years actually knows what to do when that attention finally arrives and things get complicated. Does the WNBA need outside pressure to act? What's your take? Drop it below.